Up next on Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com, adjusting the wingnut behind the wheel. Welcome to this episode of Inside the SCCA. I am Brian Bielanski, and I am really excited about this show coming up, folks. There's going to be some fun info, some good stories, and the guy who is joining me actually just wrote an article and used me as the test case, and it was highly flattering of my ability. Not so much, but that's okay because it was accurate. It may not have been highly flattering of my ability, but it was accurate. Our guest today is Rob Krider. Rob, how you doing, my friend?
Man, I am doing fantastic. Couldn't be doing better, Brian. Good to see you again.
So this podcast is born out of a very SCCA story. You and I met at the Solo Nationals last year and kind of struck up a conversation, and like much of my SCCA life for the last 35 years, we became instant friends. And
absolutely,
we're going to get to that in just a bit, but I can't start the show without the standard first question, Rob, and that is, how did you get mixed up in this crazy sport that we love?
Well, Brian, it wasn't my fault, man. Just like most of your guests on this show,
Yep.
It was my family. You know what I mean? I was born into it. My grandpa was a dirt track circle racer. He ended up upside down while my grandma was pregnant with my dad. She said, that's enough of that, as you can imagine. And then my dad was born. He was the true SCCA journeyman. In the 60s, he did everything. He was a corner worker. He did gimmick rallies. He did autocross. He got his racing license. He was just like the ultimate SCCA guy, and I grew up in the paddocks all around the country with him. He moved on to kart racing. He was at, big tracks like Laguna Seca, Sears Point, Portland International Raceway. And so my whole life was just being kind of like a pit crew guy from my dad. And I thought he was the coolest guy in the world. I got to camp at these racetracks and collect broken car parts. And someday I'll be behind the wheel of a go-kart as well. And on my way, unfortunately for me, my dad was involved in a pretty big crash in 1982, I think, and paralyzed from the waist down. And that was the end of Krider Racing Team as it should be known, right? That was it. It was over. So no go-karting for me. But then, that problem was that it was already in my blood. I'd already gotten inspired as a kid that I wanted to continue doing it. And my dad wasn't a quitter, even though he had this tremendous injury. He just continued to be involved in racing in every way he could. So when I turned 16, he and I basically restored the piece of junk car that was in our driveway. It was a 1978 El Camino. Went to Sears Point to the drag strip, won a drag race in the high school class in 1991. Nice. I'm a very old dude. And then, I lived my life a quarter mile at a time for a little while, and that got boring. So I was like, I'd like to go left and right like my dad did. And so look at that.
This was my first. I was at Friday Night Drags at Great Lakes Dragaway in Wisconsin, and I beat a Corvette with a Chevy Cavalier.
Oh, that's what you got to love about ET bracket drag racing.
I love bracket racing.
Man, I still have my trophy from 1991. I wish I'd have brought it. I could have pulled it up and showed you. Because I will never get rid of that
that's
trophy.
1991 as well.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
That's crazy.
That is nuts.
That is crazy. Well, it doesn't surprise me that you and I met at the 50th running of the SCCA Solo Nats after that humble beginning, us winning drag races in 1991. That's pretty cool, Brian.
Good stuff.
So I got tired of going down the drag strip, as a lot of guys do, and I said, hey, I want to go, left and right. And my dad said, well, that's expensive. Let's start with this sport of autocross. So I got into autocross. He and I restored the other piece of junk car that was in my side yard. This was a 1977 MGB, which we had a great time building, but ultimately I won 0 races with that car. That was a British piece of trash. It wasn't very fast. It wouldn't even go fast enough to scatter its own parts very far from the back of it. And so I got a little frustrated with the MGB because I like to win. So I picked up a car from my grandma's neighbor for free. It was a 1977 Honda Civic, and went to San Francisco Region Autocross and won first place in H stock, is what it was called back then. And that was in 1994. So that was 30 years ago. And then you and I are going to be racing Hondas against each other, 30 years later this year at the 51st running. But after doing the left and right thing with autocross for a while, I got kind of bored again. It's like, man, I'd like to be on the track a little longer than 62 seconds. But I will tell you, if you want more track time, run H Street. We are the slowest class, so you get to be on the track longer than the Super Street guys. So that's one advantage of running H Street. You get more seat time.
And it's
we'll
also
talk about more of that later.
Awesome when you're the slowest car in the slowest class.
Yes. Slowest car, slowest class. You are on the track more than anybody.
That's right.
You know, you've already hacked the system. You figured out how to be on the track more than anybody.
That's right.
Good job. So I wanted to go road racing, and that's what my dad did. And but that barrier to entry was big, and I just thought, like, man, I don't know if it's going to be a point where I'm going to need a truck and a trailer and a car with a roll cage. And then Jay Lamb invented the 24-hour lemons here in California. And so some autocross buddies and I built a 1991 Acura Integra, went to Altamont Speedway, and we don't know how it happened, but we won first place overall. Then we went on to Chump Car, which is Champ Car now. We won 2 races with them. Then we moved on to NASA, the 25 Hours of Thunder Hill. We won the Western Endurance Racing Championship. I moved on to Honda Challenge, won 4 national championships. So I've been racing Hondas for a long, long time, but I love what SCCA offers because I get to go rally crossing and autocrossing and road racing. I did the One Lap of America. I just really enjoy autocross. And then SCCA in 2022 said, hey, let's combine all these autocrosses all across the country and do a point system.
Yeah.
So I ran like 15,000 miles. I raced in 7 different states and won the, national points championship in 2022, racing another Honda and a Ford. Yes, I kind of borrowed some cars across the country and had some fun. But even though I loved road racing, I did what road racers do, and I won a lot of races, crashed a lot of cars, blew up a lot of motors. I was on fire. And then, like my grandma told my grandpa, my wife told me one day, she goes, that's probably enough. I think you've had your fun. You've won all these races. So why don't you go do something that, is easy on the pocketbook and your health? And so back to autocross.
Yep.
And so that's when I got to meet you. So I went back to the Solo Nationals, the 50th running, which was a big honor. And there was a moment there in that race where you and I were bookending the race. And I didn't say in the article who was who. I just said that one of us was in first place and one of us was in last place. I didn't dime you out, man.
That's okay. It was pretty obvious, by the way.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't know. I just left it out for the readers to figure out. And then ultimately, neither one of us won. So
that's true.
That's how it goes. But for a moment, we were the fastest and the slowest guy in the class, and we became friends right away. And here we are today. So thank you for having me on the show, Brian.
So I went last year to the Solo Nationals, and I've told the story a couple times, but my plan was never to actually compete. I was going to go do the podcast and do my thing. And Hayward Wagner, who is one of my buddies at National, who was a early supporter of the podcast, said, dude, you can't go and not drive.
That was good advice.
And I'm like, what do you mean by that? I haven't been in an autocross at all in 30 years. And he goes, well, who cares? Sign up and go have fun. And that's exactly what I did. And we found a couple of guys in a Crown Vic that was my competition. And
yeah, you were definitely eyeing that Crown Vic car. You were pretty butthurt about that car.
Well, I just didn't want to, my goal going in was to try not to finish last. And
yes, a good goal.
I did not succeed. But
yeah, no, that's okay. I wanted to win, and I didn't succeed.
That's
so,
true.
Hey,
so where did
both? It happens in racing.
Where did you end up finishing?
Fourth place.
Fourth place.
So I picked up a trophy.
Yep.
Which is always an honor. If you trophy at the Solo Nationals, that's not easy to do.
Right.
And so my hat's off to anybody who's pulled that off, and I was lucky enough to pull that off last year. So
right.
And coming back again this year, looking forward to some more action.
So part of my issue, because I don't know if you've seen my toolbox, Rob, but in my toolbox on the top drawer, it's got wrenches. And then because I label I'm very attempt to be very organized. So
I like it.
My toolbox is labeled with a little label maker, and the top drawer says wrenches and victory speeches.
Really?
The bottom drawer says screwdrivers and excuses. Okay. so I spent a lot of time in the bottom drawer. Let's just say that, okay? And
gotcha. I like to be a top drawer guy. It sounds like you're a bottom drawer.
Well, I want to be a top drawer guy. I got plenty of stuff.
Do, man.
Yeah, I've got plenty of stuff to put in the ready for when I can roll out that top drawer. But part of my problem is that I spend so much time broadcasting, going to the Super Tours and going to do races at Buttonwillow and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're everywhere.
That I don't have a lot of weekends free, and when I do have weekends free, my family likes to spend time with me. So yes. I have not had a lot of time to do autocross, even after I decided to go to the Solo Nationals last year. So but one thing I realized at Solo Nationals was that there were cars that were a lot faster than me that should not have been a lot faster than me. And of course, it's not my fault, right?
Absolutely. It's never the driver's
fault.
No, it's the last thing you should look at is yourself.
It's got to be the car, right? There's got to be
100%.
something that I can do to the car, which is how I contacted you again. And we've talked a couple of times on Facebook over the last 12 months. And a couple of weeks ago, month ago, when I knew I was going back, I said, okay, maybe we can do some stuff with the car. So I sent you a message. And the premise of the message was there's really 3 things you can do to a street class car. Right? You can put on better tires and wheels. You can change the sway bar, front or back, and
Correct.
You can change the shocks. That's about it.
Yep.
That's pretty much it. So I said to you, and you wrote a great article about this, so we're not going to get into this because I want people to go and read the article. But I said,
race car drivers don't read, Brian.
I know.
That's the problem.
Well, that's their problem. If they don't read, I'm going to beat them because you've given me all the great
Yes,
advice.
you are.
So I'm good with that. But no, so I said to you, I said, if I were to prioritize those 3 things, because I don't know how much money I have to spend, what would you do in what order? Would you go tires, shocks, sway bar, or what order would you do things in? And I'm not going to tell anybody what you said because they got to go read the article. But
all right, SCCA.com.
But you started, and I'll put a link to the article in the show notes, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll get that to you. So if you're driving, don't pull over and get wrecked by trying to remember what that is. We'll put a link in. So you answered my question, but the premise of your article before you got to answering the question was, usually I tell people, adjust the nut behind the wheel.
Yes.
That would have been me in this scenario.
The big nut behind the wheel. That's what we call it.
Yeah. I'm either a loose nut or a wing nut or just flat nut case, but I get it. I 100% agree. So that is what we're going to talk about today.
Right on.
And it's always been my premise, and I've talked to a lot of really fantastic race car drivers over the years, thankfully, through this whole little podcast, radio, broadcasting thing.
And you have. In fact, you had Brian Redmond on recently, and I thought, man, you're really lowering the rent by having Rob Krider on the show. So I appreciate the offer.
No,
I'm glad to be here.
You've got 130 first-place finishes, my friend. There's no rent lowering here. So I said, my thought was we got to talk about this. And I've talked to a lot of high-end, really talented race car drivers over the years, from Brian Redmond and Mario Andretti down to SCCA national champions. And I asked the same question or a similar question to all of them. And the answer I tend to get is to become in the top 90 percentile of race car drivers is pretty achievable. But to be in that top 95 to 100 to 99%, because I don't believe anybody can become 100% awesome. But to get to that top 95, 99%, that's where it takes a lot of either talent or seat time or a combination of all of that. So the thought process for this podcast is I need you, hopefully you, can help me get to that 90% level or 70% level or 85% level. And autocross is an interesting beast. It is. I think it is the one of the most difficult things to do with a car. And the reason I think that is because we don't get to practice really. And
the track changes every time.
And we have to learn a new track every single day, usually.
Yep.
So it's such a difficult discipline. And it's not like going to a track day where you can even go on a HPDE and you can learn a track at a very low price point before you even go race on it. And
yes.
And there's a lot that you can take away from that when you decide to go wheel to wheel. We don't have that.
You can sim a track and learn it before you even go to that track, which is not available on autocross.
Absolutely. Although I'd love to see that change, by the way. But you still wouldn't be able to autocross on a sim the same track that you're going to, but it would give you an opportunity to get some seat time.
Correct.
So I'm the guy who finished last in the slowest class at the runoffs last year. Or at the Solo Nationals. What should I do first? Let's not talk about changing the car. What should I do first at my next autocross?
All right, hey, it's a great question. Well, I want to talk about autocross real fast because I can say it's probably been said before, but autocrossers always make great road racers, and road racers always make really bad autocrossers.
Typically.
And the reason for that is autocross is an incredibly high-paced, fast, dynamic sport that comes at you very, very quickly. So autocrossers have to walk a course, learn it, memorize it, and then run it 3 times at the fastest possible rate, right? And it's a super aggressive sport because we have really nothing to lose. Like, if I'm going to the keel at Mid-Ohio and I go too deep, I'm going to be in the tire wall, right?
Right.
But if I go too deep at the Solo Nationals, I'm just going to knock over an orange cone, and that buffs right out of the front bumper. So autocrossers drive at the extreme 10/10ths level because that's how you squeeze the most you can out of a car. So the first thing I say is that you want to be smooth, but you want to kick the aggression level up. Like, really, you want to be angry in the car. We call it driving angry for a reason, and you want to go for it. Now, I'm not saying you want to be full red mist where your pupils are constricting and the adrenaline's going and you get that tunnel vision where, we're still human beings. There's only so many things we can do. Like, our perception reaction is only so much.
Right.
It takes about 1.5 seconds to see and respond to something. But the reality is that as human beings, we can try to take the information in and process it better so that we can be better behind the wheel. All we're going to do as a driver is provide inputs to the steering wheel, the brake, and the gas, and try to convince this car to go faster and faster and faster. So as we put those inputs in, we want to be very smooth about it, but we want to be very quick about it, right?
Right.
So the first thing anyone will ever tell you is, one, look up. And you've heard it at every racing school you've ever been to,
Yep.
any plane you do, it doesn't matter, any kind of car stuff, they're talking about raise your eyes up. And so I have people do this exercise because every year I do the driving school for the Fresno chapter of the San Francisco region SCCA. It's a great club. We have a good time there. And so I take the students out and I say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Go outside and do this exercise. Anybody can do it. I want you to pick a point way down, like 100 yards away. Just look at something way, way down and you can see it. Let's say you're looking at a tree. And as you see that tree, focus your eyes on that and you'll realize you can see the tree and you can see the ground and the parking lot. You can see all the things between you and the tree. They're very visual to you. You can see them.
Right.
Now, I'll tell you, take your eyes and look down at the ground. Look at like an acorn in the parking lot and look down at that acorn. Now, you really haven't moved your head at all. You're standing in the same position, but you can see the acorn with all the detail. But what you cannot see is the tree. It's now gone to you. It's not available to you. The information that's happening up there, what that tree is, your brain can't see it and it can't compute it. Therefore, you can't use the information. So in racing, instead of a tree and an acorn, it's a cone or a corner or an apex. So the higher you keep your eyes up, the more information you're getting earlier, which is important because your brain, you're not a supercomputer, you're a human being. Your brain needs time to process the information. So looking up makes all the difference. And as you look up, it comes at you slower and slower every lap. So the problem with autocross that's very difficult for people who are new at it is that you are so fired up on adrenaline. You'll get out, your hands are shaking. It's super exciting. It is a jolt of adrenaline. It's super, super fun. That's why the sport is so great. Low barrier to entry, easy costs, and high adrenaline. But when you get out of the car, if I ask you, like, hey, what'd you do in the second corner? You'll be like, I don't even know. I have no idea. I know I didn't hit a cone. I know I took the green flag. I took the checker flag. I'm here in the grid again. I survived it, but I really couldn't tell you the details. If you were going to talk to one of our top tier guys, those 95% guys, and you say, hey, what'd that go? They can tell you in incredible detail exactly where their hand placement was in the wheel, where they had the right front tire land, where they were at, percentage of throttle, how much speed they carried out of the corner, why they did it. And then when you hear them tell you that, you're like, oh my gosh, like, have you been on this track 100 times?
Yeah.
And they've been on the track the same amount of times as you, one time. And so they have this ability to really learn tracks and understand it. So walking the course is a huge advantage in autocross, right? And walking the course is hard because it becomes social hour, right? You and I start walking, we start talking, you start telling me about that tire behind you that you got at Le Mans.
Right.
I start telling you about the time I won a race and, the one lap of America, blah, blah, blah. And then we stop paying attention to the course walk. So sometimes you got to kind of be a little bit of a jerk and say, look, I'll hang out with you later and we'll get some beers after the race and I'll tell you all these great stories. But right now, I got to be on my own in my own head and I got to walk this course and learn it, because as you do that, you'll pick up the opportunity to learn more about the course. Now, there's a new hack I use. It's basically this thing called MyFitnessPal. It's an app for runners.
Okay.
And so when I walk the course, it's a free app. I map my run and I just press a button, stick my phone in my pocket, and I walk the course. And at the end of the finish line, I say, run completed. What that does is it draws a little line of the track, and it shows a Google image of the parking lot. So I have a little map of the track that nobody else has. And I look at it between
Not
runs.
anymore.
Like, oh, okay, that was the turn. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, hey, I'm here to make people faster. So it's like a really cool thing. It's an easy hack. Technology has really helped us in this opportunity where, one, walk the course. And when you walk it, you want to walk the course with your eyes up, and you want to walk the course where you are going to be in the driver's seat, right?
Right.
So if I'm walking through a slalom, when I go by the right side of a cone, I'm very close to my driver's door in the right side of that cone. When I walk around the other side of the slalom, you'll see me walk around, about 8 feet over, like the width of my car. And what I'm doing there is two. One, I'm making sure my eyes are in the same position they'll be when I go around the track, and I'm mapping my course with my little app as well to be accurate. So that's an easy hack. So first thing you're going to do is pay attention to the course walk and walk it and walk it and walk it and walk it. Now the Solo Nationals is tough because you're running 2 different tracks in 2 days. So you got to learn 2 tracks in 2 days and run against the fastest people in the world, really. And one of the things I'll say about autocross is this, road racing, there's a barrier to entry, right? It helps if your dad is a wealthy guy, you know what I mean? And you have been in a go-kart since you were 2 years old, and like Max Verstappen, the guy is a talented guy. But the best driver in the world is probably a guy from India driving a lorry for Amazon. You probably know he's the most talented guy, never got the opportunity.
Sure.
Where autocross is cool, the barrier to entry is so low, you really get mounds and mounds of talent. People show up, you buy a Honda Civic, you throw on some tires, and you're competitive. And, suddenly you see really, really fast people that are just incredibly good behind the wheel of a car, and you can learn from them.
And I think it's especially the case in the street classes, because in some of the other classes you can mask talent with toys. You can make your car faster, you can put on a fast bit, you can do all this stuff with your car. In the street classes, we're all limited to those 3 things I talked about at the top of the show. So, and I would guess that most of the cars in the pointy end of the stick have maximized what the car can do from a technical standpoint. And now it's almost like a spec class where it's car against car, driver against driver.
Absolutely.
So I think in the street classes, it is much more about how good the nut behind the wheel is than it is what our nuts are under the wheel. So I think that's really important. For me, with the course walk and looking ahead and being able to talk about a run afterwards, I have a little bit of an advantage than someone who's just starting out, because I've done a lot of stuff over the years. So while I'm really rusty on the solo side of things, and I haven't done it solo in a long time, my brain still has that motorsports mentality of where to think about how. So, but I couldn't tell you necessarily where my hands were on the wheel after a run. But I can say to myself after a run, okay, first third of the course felt really good and smooth, didn't make any mistakes there. I really screwed up the center, the center portion of the course, and then I was able to figure it back out at the end. So I kind of could conceptualize in my brain where I was really slow, but I certainly can't tell you where my hands were when I was hitting the brakes, whether I was giving full brake pressure or not. None of that is in my brain when I'm done with the run. So the other thing I think it's difficult about autocross is that in a car, on a racetrack, you get into your zone, you get into your focus, and then you've got 25 or 30 or 2 hours, depending on the length of the session, to stay in that zone. Whereas with autocross, you do it for 60 seconds, and then you stop for 10 or 15 minutes. And all of a sudden, boom, you're out of the zone. And now you're back in the car, and you're driving up the line. You got to refocus and get yourself back in the zone again. And that's unlike any other kind of motorsport as well.
Absolutely. And that's the real key, is if you can get back that focus and get back in the zone, you'll be successful. So let's talk about that. Let's say you do your first run and you go, okay, the first third of the course went well. I know I made a big mistake on the big showcase turn. So what I tell people is, and I got this advice from somebody a long time ago, don't reinvent the entire course. Okay. Don't say to yourself, okay, I'm just going to attack and change everything.
Right.
If the first third of the course went well, do that again. Try to fix the showcase turn where you know you made an error. Make sure you're on the brakes where you want to be, put the car where you want to have it, and try to get more exit speed. Make everything work. And if that corner works well, then things get better.
Right.
One of the problems with autocross is that, let's say you had a good first third of the course, you fix the showcase turn, then all your muscle memory for the next corner after the showcase is now not as great, because you're carrying so much more speed out of the showcase that now you're like, oh, shoot, when I just breathed the brake before, I was able to get through this little chicane. But now I'm just mowing cones down with the right side door because I'm carrying way more speed. So the better you get on the run, the more things get kind of faster and difficult later.
Right.
And so a driver's ability to adjust to that quickly is really what puts people at the pointy end of this podium, in my opinion, is that they can just feel the car. So my next advice to you was, don't think about the car. That's a lot of mechanics, and there's a lot of things going on, and steering angles and all these things. What I want you to think about is just one thing. I want you to think about the tire interface with the surface of the autocross course.
Okay.
That's all that matters, right? So as I'm going through a right-hand turn, I'm not thinking about what the car's doing. I'm thinking about, what is the left front tire doing? Is it singing to me? Is it folding over? Is it just totally dying? Is it understeering? Because if the tires are happy, then the vehicle is happy. So I don't think about all this complexity, like, oh, should I put on the rebound, the shock? Should I adjust my tire pressure 1 pound? All I want to think about is, am I pushing this tire too hard? Is the car oversteering? Is using all 4 tires? So I'm kind of just thinking about keeping tires happy and pushing them to the edge, right? That slip angle is where you want that tire to be happy. That's what makes everything work. So you want to push those tires. And this is, again, the difference between road racing and autocross, is that we just thrash our tires in autocross as hard as we can. When road racing, you're kind of, hey, I got to keep these things underneath me for a 40-minute race. I got to maintain my tire pressure and tire temperature so I can finish the race strong. Autocross, that doesn't matter.
Right.
And if you hear what tires sound like, they are just being absolutely destroyed. You think, wow, that's pretty aggressive. And I don't think that's the way to run.
Yeah.
Well, it's the way to run in autocross for sure. The fast guys, they're making a lot of tire noise.
Sure.
I'm not saying you want to just understeer the tire to the point where it's just saturated and not working. That just because you're making tire noise does not mean it's going well.
Right.
What I'm saying is that you can find that happy balance. If the tire is happy, and in a front wheel drive car like you're driving, you don't have to think about the rear. They're just trailer tires back there, just following you around. They're really not doing much. So you just got to think about the outside tire in the corner you're in. And if it's working as hard as it can, and if it's not, maybe carry a little more speed, right?
Right.
If it's working too hard, then carry a little less speed or maybe a little more brake pressure, and then set the car and then back on the gas.
Yeah.
So the other thing about autocross that's interesting is that there's really no coasting ever, right? You're either on the gas, on the brakes.
Right.
You're really, really, really aggressive about the switchover between brake and gas. And so there's not a lot of like, well, I'll just kind of cruise through here and see what you're doing. You're making some sort of driver input with fuel or brake all the time.
Do you left foot brake?
So I do not. Now, there are many, many people who are super, super good at it. My friend Johannes van Overbeek, who's, gone to Le Mans, he doesn't left foot brake either. And he won Daytona 24 hours. So we joke about that, hey, it doesn't mean, you're not a good driver because you don't left foot brake. It's just a choice. Now, I think in certain cars, it's an advantage for sure, especially if you're running an automatic. Like right now, I'm running a Porsche 718 Cayman GTS with a PDK, and that's a car that doesn't have a clutch. So that's probably a car I should be left foot braking. But unfortunately for me, I haven't really taught it to myself, and I've won a lot of races without it. So I'm kind of like, I don't need it. But really, I should probably learn it and do it. But unless you grew up in a go-kart or drove a forklift and you're very, very used to left foot braking, I wouldn't say go to the Solo Nationals and suddenly teach it to yourself in the first run. That is a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. The one nice thing about Solo Nationals is they have that warm-up test course. So you could play a little bit there, but that's really, I always think when you get to the premier event, that's not the time to teach yourself how to do a new skill. Don't change your setup. Don't teach yourself a new skill. All you want to do is use the things that have made you successful to get there and then implement them on the big day. Right.
And let's talk about the test course for 1 second, because one of the things about the Nationals is you have 2 different courses and the surface is a little bit different and the test course surface is a lot different. So if you go to the Nationals, so I'm a California guy, so it's not a home field advantage for us. We travel halfway across the country. We have to learn the surface, learn the track, set our tire pressures. And I spent a lot of time on that practice course, tinkering around with cars and changing sway bars. And then I set them up really good for the practice course. And then I built cars that were really, really way more oversteer than they should have been for the big courses. So that's a mistake I have made. So I would give folks a little bit of warning that if you're pushing a little bit on the practice course, you're probably good for the big courses. And if you're oversteering the practice course, you're going to have a big problem when you get to the 2 big courses.
Right. And the other part about nationals, and this isn't necessarily a conversation about nationals because most people do a lot of autocrosses before they go to nationals. They're not idiot like me who does 1 or 2 and then goes to nationals. But those courses are long. Even the shorter
Yes.
course is longer than probably most autocross courses around the country. And I just found that to be I was exhausted at the end of my runs.
Yeah, no, and if you don't get out of there exhausted, you're not doing it right, because your
Right.
adrenaline is peaked for 72 seconds.
Right.
And what's interesting about the course is not only long, but they're generally a little quicker. So the speed's up. So a lot of times you're in third gear at the Nationals on, if you're a guy like me, I run in Fresno, we have a very small course, very tight stuff. And so if you get your car set up good for that,
Right.
and that's how you run a lot, when you go to the Nationals, like, oh man, I'm in a different gear, I'm in a different speed. And so it takes a little getting used to. And so that's one of the disadvantages to not being from Nebraska, right? You don't
Right.
get all that time on that track. And local guys do well there for good reason.
What's your thoughts on a banker run? Because I thought I blew my first two runs on my second day at Nationals, which means there was this pressure on that final run, and I know I left a lot behind me on that final run.
Sure.
And what I thought probably afterwards would have been a better idea was to put in kind of a banker run the first run, which also would have given me a chance to not blow the next run, because I would have realized where the course was, because I blew the same gate twice in a row, the same cone twice in a row.
Right.
If I had tried to take just a little tiny off on the first run to make sure I knew the course, I'd get a time in and I'd be okay with that. Then you can throw caution to the wind on run number 2 and run number 3. Is that a good thought process for a newbie?
It is 100% the right methodology to be successful for not a newbie, but for everybody, right? Because here's what I tell people. I don't call it a banker run. I call it a survey run.
Right.
I say, look, your first run is your survey.
Right.
So you're about to put one in the books or in the bank and get a time and learn the track. Have your camera on, have your app on, whatever you're using, learn the track. If you blow the first run, you miss a gate, you've learned nothing.
Right.
And so you got nothing from that. You have no time, you have a DNF, and you have nothing really to move with. So that first run should be, when I say conservative, I mean 8.9 tenths conservative, right? And then you really want to throw it down the second run and try to put one down. You'll probably smack a cone. And then the third run's like, okay, I got one in the bank. I got a dirty run. Now I got to put all that I've learned together and get one that's quick. And that's why I was in first place for the first 2 laps of 6, because I was putting down conservative bank runs. Other guys were doing basically super bonsai runs, and they were all dirty. So I was like, hey, I'm looking pretty good, but I wasn't paying attention that actually some of the fast guys they were coned.
Right.
So once they cleaned it up on the third run, I moved down in the standings. So I was like, oh, shoot. But if you don't get that survey run in and you don't get that bank run in, you're still trying to figure the track out. So remember, autocross, it's only your fastest lap on the one day, right? It's not like a rallycross where you're adding all your laps together.
Right.
So if you blow one or cone one or whatever, you still just need one good lap. So if you get that one good lap in the bank, first lap, then you're money, and you can just go from there. And this is the thing about the Solo Nationals, like the Violent Femme said, it will go down on your permanent record, right? So if you want to look at my record from 2005, Rob Krider coned away a trophy in the 2005 Nationals, you can still see that online. It's so embarrassing. You're like, oh shoot, so you don't want to have 3 DNFs on your record, and especially at the big show, if you don't get a time on the first day, then you can't add that the second day, and you're basically, I don't even know why you're still there. So
right.
You definitely were feeling the pressure. You were feeling the pressure. Hey, I got to get one down, or I'm not even going to have a time in this event. And you didn't want to end that way. And you did the right thing. You put a time in the bank, and you came away with a finish, and that's a big deal. Good job.
Yeah. But I still finished.
But great question, because that's I just talked about the aggression component of it, but
right.
It's that balance between aggression and quickness, and also getting a time in the book. So survey run, bank run, one in the books. Right. 100% first lap. That's a good idea.
And I also find for myself that if I blow a cone on the first run, all I'm thinking about the rest of the next run is that cone. I'm not thinking about
yes.
the first third of the course that I did fine. I'm not thinking about anything else. For the whole until I get to that cone, I am so bad because all I'm thinking about is the cone I hit or the turn I missed. So
and let's talk about that, because one of the things that's happening is, and motorcycle riders will tell you this, it's all about your eyes, right? So if you're totally focused on thinking about that cone, let me tell you what your eye is doing. Your eye is looking right at that cone.
Right.
And where your eye goes, the car goes inadvertently. And so you'll end up hitting it again sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, how did I do this a second time? I talked to myself about it for 10 minutes in the paddock. I told myself not to do it, and I did it again. So you got to kind of like, let it go.
And even worse, when I missed the same cone twice in run 1 and run 2. And in run 2, I missed it worse than I missed it the first time. So I knew what I had, but that's the brain telling yourself, or not telling yourself how to do it the right way. So yes, having a short memory is really important for autocross and golfers.
Yes, for sure. Let it go. Another quick thing you can use is a super easy tech. So I use a GoPro with an Apple iPad.
Uh-huh.
So basically between runs, I just watch the run before on my iPad. And why that helps me is if I blow a gate, right, I can watch it like, oh, there it was. Now I've seen it. As opposed to asking my friends like, hey, man, did you see the gate I blew? And the guy's like, look, we're all egotistical maniacs out here. I didn't see anything you did. I have no idea what you did. I'm doing my own thing. I'm like, okay, got it.
Sure.
So yeah, a little bit of video replay. I will tell you though that technology, because it's Bluetooth and stuff, it's also very frustrating in that, it works about 60% of the time. So
sure.
You're like,
sure.
I'm looking at my video and it's not working. I'm getting frustrated with the tech. And so I'm like, oh, wait. I'm not here to make a movie. I'm here to race cars. So I'm going to put this away and concentrate back on what's coming through the windshield is what matters.
And again, we're talking a little bit more about Solo Nationals than I kind of intended to. The other thing that you have going for you at Solo Nationals is on your second day, there's plenty of video out there of the course you're about to run. So you can watch on YouTube dozens of runs, if not more, from that second course. And
I spent hours and hours and hours mining the internet for that, for sure.
The worst part is if you're in the first 2 days on day 1. You're completely on your own. You are completely on your own. So I was lucky that I ran on Thursday, Friday last year. Well, we ran on Thursday, Friday. So I spent all night, I could have gone to parties and been completely snookered off my ass the next morning. But no, I went home and just spent a lot of time on YouTube watching runs, trying to get an idea. And that helped me a ton. But I also spent I should have spent more time walking course number 1. The first course I had to do, because you've got all the options for the video on course number 2. So, and I felt like I didn't do enough on course number 1. So, but that was the one I didn't miss any gates on.
Thing, at least. Yeah. Because I did the opposite. I went and hung out with the Texas Spokes guys and drank beer all night and raced big wheels in their Pro Solo. And I still have a scar on my calf because when you turn that big wheel all the way to the right, it just burns off all the skin on your inside of your leg. So props to those guys. They have a great party at the beer garden. I love it every year I'm there, but I should probably spend a little more time in my hotel room watching video.
Yeah. Too funny. All right. What's the next thing you want me to do?
All right. So we talked about keeping your eyes up, which is the obvious stuff. We talked about really getting that banker run in. We talked about really looking at the tire, all those things. We talked about the aggression level.
Right.
The next thing you want to do is basically bring it all together. Okay. And so the thing is this, it's you versus the car. And so we're going to stay out of that bottom drawer, right? We're going to get rid of those screwdrivers and get rid of those excuses, even though I love to use that drawer. And I mean, I always like to blame the car. I'm like, well, I had the wrong car. Is it MGB's fault? I never want to race, Yeah. I had the wrong vehicle. So, race car drivers are filled with excuses. Yes. We are born with them. They just pour out of our body at any time. Ask anybody in every level. If it's Formula One or a Solo Nats, is going to be somebody who's a race car driver complaining about why they didn't win. Why the nut behind the wheel is the hardest thing to adjust is it takes this thing called self-reflection, right? Which is very difficult to look inward and say, I blew it. I lost the race. I didn't drive the way I should have drove. I didn't spend enough. I spent too much time racing big wheels that night. I didn't look at the video. I didn't do the thing. So once you just make peace with that and say, okay, it's on me, right? And don't think about what everyone else is doing, right? Don't look at oh man, I don't think I can make up 0.8 of a second on the second day. Don't worry about that. First of all, the time is out there, right? No one's ever run a perfect lap. There's more time out there than you think. Don't psych yourself out, right? These cars are really run on, I think, confidence. So being a confident person and having confidence in yourself will make you a better driver. So stop beating yourself up about the gate you missed. Stop beating yourself up about the 4 Crown Vic in your class. Stop beating yourself up about the fact that, oh man, I don't have enough seat time. And just tell yourself like, I'm the man. I can do this. I'm going to go faster. I know how to do it. The car can do it, and go out there and implement, right? So self-confidence brings all that together.
Right.
So if you think about negative stuff and you're just looking at the cone you hit over and over and over again, you're going to run into trouble. If you know you can do it, and I know you can do it, Brian, then basically you put yourself on that grid and you say like, here we go. Let's go win a race.
What's your thoughts on coaching?
So coaching, I'm a big proponent of, for sure. I get to do it. I've been a successor of being coached. It's tough in autocross because, again, the tracks change every time. But like the Evolution School, any of the schools you do, you will come out of there so much better. So 100%, I recommend it. Here's the thing about coaching. When someone's in your right front seat and they're watching you, they're seeing things you don't see.
Right.
So even though I've won a bunch of races, I've been to a number of racing schools across the country, and every single time I attend one, I still learn something else. I mean, You're like, oh man. In fact, what's so funny, last one I was at, someone's like, hey, put your eyes up. And I'm like, well, I tell people that. You tell me, I'm like, yeah, I know, but you're looking at the friggin' hood ornament on this car. Look up. I'm like, oh, you're right. Or just hand position, or how much maybe I'm really kind of smashing the brake pedal instead of being smooth with the brake application. So when someone else tells you that, they're not lying to you, right? They're being paid to make you better. So you have to take that in with some humility and say like, okay, you're right. And I can learn from that. So coaching is that third party. It's like we never could learn from our mom and dad, but we always learn from someone else.
Right.
That coach brings that aspect. And generally they're just better at it and they know more about it. Or even if they're not better than you, but they're seeing it from a different perspective, you still pick stuff up.
Right.
And I mean, the things I learned from like Skip Barber or, School of Mid-Ohio, I still implement in every form of racing I do. And so, and I appreciate that coaching. So yeah, I mean, you can't, I would say that if you have a chance to go to an Evo school and you're like, well, that's, that costs this much money and I'm going to burn a set of tires up, you'll come out of there faster than you would if you bought yourself a new set of fancy dual adjustable shocks. Guarantee it.
Yeah.
That's the truth. Nobody wants to hear that because we just love to add to cart. It's part of the excuses, right? Like, well, I didn't have the same kind of really cool shocks, and I didn't have the right hot tire this year, and maybe I didn't have my air pressure right. Well, it's like, yeah, well, maybe, but maybe you just didn't drive that great. Like, well, nobody wants to hear that.
Exactly.
Like, I don't want to hear that either.
Exactly.
But the reality is that driving is going to get you to that top 5% that you talked about at the beginning of the show.
Right.
Getting behind the wheel, seat time. So a school and a coach is good. Now in autocross, it's a little tougher to get, but it is available. And so if you get a chance to take advantage of it, 100% do it. Like I said, we do it here at the Fresno region every year. It's a great opportunity to do it. And if you get to coach too, you realize if you're going to teach something, you have to be an expert in it. So a lot of times you're like, oh, I got to stop these bad habits that I have because ultimately I'm teaching other people how to do it. And so I'm like, hey, do what I say. I know when you see me drive, I drive like kind of like a jerk.
Yeah.
But ultimately that's, that works for me, but maybe not for you. But that's just the aggression component. But coaching is it's key, man. So if you get a shot to do it, and you know a lot of fast people, Brian, you can definitely take advantage of that.
Definitely. Let me just take a second here and thank the folks who helped me do this here. And first off, I want to thank raceschool.com. They are our new-ish, well, yeah, new, still freshly minted presenting sponsor. So it's Inside the SCCA presented by raceschool.com. Great folks there, one of the top California driving schools. People from all over the country come out here to California to go to raceschool.com. That's how good they are. And you can get yourself a full SCCA license there. You can also, if you're not really interested in going performance driving, you can do the defensive driving class. It'd be great to send your teens to that, by the way. That's a fantastic school for that. And they also have high performance driving days that are a little less dangerous or a little less commitment for that. So check out raceschool.com. RaceKeeper is the official in-car camera of Inside the SCCA. That was the proof of how poor my performance was at the Solo Nationals last year. The video was beautiful, the driving not so much, but racekeeper.com. Great folks there. Check them out. All of their information is in the show notes. Solo Performance Specialties. If you've been to any of the Solo National Tours or the Solo Nationals, Dave and his crew are there with their truck, and they've got a bunch of awesome stuff, and they're very helpful. And if you're not going to one of those events, you can catch them on their website, so check them out as well. And then, of course, Ray Esports is the official sim race league of Inside the SCCA. Of course, they're the unofficial sim race league of the SCCA. That's a long story, but anyway, gotta love Ray Esports. They do a great job, and it's racers racing, so you don't get some of the craziness that comes with people who are sim racing, who may have never been on a racetrack. There's a little bit more respect involved when you race with the Ray Esports guys, so go check them out as well. All of the information for all of those groups that help me out are in the show notes, and if you do get a chance to talk to them, tell them I sent you. I'm sure they would appreciate that, and I would as well. Okay, we are back. How important is it to tune out other things and maybe other people? Because one of the things when I got there last year is I had what I thought were fairly good solo tires, and the first thing someone said, "Oh God, those tires stink." and
Yeah.
or the best thing you're going to be able to do to go faster is get better tires on the car. So that was in my head the whole time.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing about the Solo Nationals. You have 1,000 competitors, and you got 1,000 opinions.
Of course.
And
you know what they say about opinions and assholes.
An expert. Everyone there is the best ever. And I don't know why these guys walk around like, oh, you're not. And the reality is, I mean, when someone gives you that advice, you're like, well, listen, I appreciate that. I'm racing in 15 minutes, so the fact that you're telling me I need new tires is not helping me, sir. But good talking to you.
Well, and the guy who said it was a very, very, very sweet guy, and you'll probably know who he is. He was down by us on the grid, and maybe the nicest human being I've ever met. So I'm sure he was well-meaning, but it got into my head.
Yeah. So let that go. You got to let that noise go for sure. Yeah. I'm guilty of that. As much as I say we got to adjust that big nut behind the wheel, I'm also a tinkerer, right? Yeah. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just adjust the camber. I think I changed my rear sway bar in the middle of the Nationals last year just to change something.
Yeah.
But I do that a lot. But the reality is that you've got to let that go, right? Yeah. And I'm guilty of that, like listening, because the reality is this. I know I'm not the fastest guy in the world, and the guys who are faster are probably at that event. So I'm listening as much as I can. I want to learn from other people. And so you want to take that information in and be like, okay, tomorrow I'll do that, or next year I'll do that. But it doesn't mean you got to really change your whole workup at the big race,
Right.
And that's where seat time comes into play, right? So if someone tells you like, oh no, you should try a different set of tires, great. I will get those from Tire Rack. I'll ship them to my house. I'll have them mounted, and I'll go give them a shot at a local regional event and find out what I need. And you're gonna need to spend some time with that, right? Maybe your alignment needs to change. Maybe your tire pressure needs to change. Maybe the way you attack a corner changes. So every tire is different, And right now on the 200 treadwear game, which is with the tires you have to have for the street class, there's a pretty good tire war going on, which is Yokohama and Falcon and Bridgestone. There's choices there. And I've had the chance to test all those tires and run all those tires. I can tell you they're all within a few tenths of each other. There's no real breakout winner right now. So when a guy's telling you like, oh no, if you don't have these, then you're dust. It's like, well, come on, let's be realistic.
I didn't have any of those three. So
yeah, that's true.
It was funny because I asked you that question when we were talking about what to change, and you recommended a tire, and I said, well, I might have a chance to get a different type, cheaper, and you said, oh yeah, that's fine. It's only 0.3 of a second difference, and a guy like me who's not at the pointy end of the stick, 0.3 of a second is not going to make a whole lot of a difference to me. Now maybe when I'm vying for a trophy, that becomes much, much more important, where 0.3 might be the difference between first, well, definitely would be the difference between first and second, and might even be the difference between first and 10th at the Solo Nationals.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a Solo Nationals win that was 1,000th of a second, you know, and my heart's breaking for the second place guy because that is the hardest position to be in. You know what I mean? I'd rather finish in fourth like I did last year than finish in second. It's just the truth. Like, you know, we all want to win. I don't want to come in second. There's actually been some interesting, some psychologists looked at podiums from like the Tour de France to F1, and they found out the first place guy's face looks like this. I thought I was going to win. I prepared to win, and I won, and here I am.
Yeah.
And the second place guy looks like he just watched his kid run out in front of a school bus and get killed. And the third place guy is the happiest dude in the podium. He's just like, I didn't even think I was going to be here.
Exactly.
Like, so if you want to be happy, finish in third place, and you'll be super stoked. But second place, that is a tough place. In fact, if you were to ask me like, what's the greatest race you've ever won or whatever, I'm like, I don't know, but I can tell you all the times I came in second. I can tell you all the gory and ugly details about the times I lost. And so when you talked about like, how do I, get that concentration level up, you got to let that negativity go and cut that noise away from you. Because remember, you're only going to get about 60, 70 seconds on that course, and that's irreplaceable. So if someone says like, hey, good luck, and it looks like your left rear tire's low, you're like, oh shoot, oh my gosh, I got the wrong tires. Look, you just got to go out there and perform on the big stage in that moment and get your time in the bank and do it. So yeah, concentration, it's a mental game. And racing is a mental game. I think it's really heightened at the solo level because you're on the track such a minute time. Even Formula One gets a number of laps to put one in the bank, right? To get the qualifying time. They get a number of sessions out there, quality 1, quality 2. That's not available to us.
Right.
You get, 3 shots at it.
Yeah, definitely. So are there any other bits and pieces? We're kind of getting to the point now where we're gonna start wrapping things up here. what do you think is the a reasonable timetable for someone to be able to get to maybe that 75% point? Should it take you 5 events? Should it take you 10 events? Obviously, assuming that you're doing events somewhat close together, so you don't forget everything you learned at the last event. Is there a idea as to how long it should take someone to really improve doing this?
That's a good question. The cool part about the sport is, again, low barrier to entry, ease of use, local events, low cost, since you can run a lot. Some people are just talented, man.
Right.
They can just get in a car and go fast right away. But racing is a learned sport. You can learn to be fast. You can learn the techniques at going to a racing school that actually will make you better. So either makes you're already moderately good and makes you superior, or you had no idea what you were doing and it makes you a mid-packer or whatever. Right. You will see that delta in your performance from that coaching. So I would say that, 3 to 4 events, you already kind of figure it out. Like, okay, this is where I start, this is where I go. And then really it just comes down to feeling the chassis, right? If your butt is telling you where to go, that's the brain you have is your butt, then you've already got a natural inclination to the sport. When you have that ability to go like, oh, I'm oversteering, I need to counter steer and catch it, then you have the talent really that's needed for the sport, because you're going to run that car on 2 wheels, 3 wheels, you're going to have it rotating, spinning out all the time. And then I will tell you, if you go out for 3 events and you don't spin out and don't touch a cone, you're not trying hard enough, right? So you want to pick up that aggression and find that level. So, but once you get there and you're like, okay, I'm getting used to this thing. This car rotates here. I know where I can stab the gas, where I got to breathe the brakes and really pick up the aggression. Then you're kind of in the zone. And then you got to fine tune really your ability to manage the tire and make that adjustability. So when we talk about stuff, we always mention tires. If you spend 5 events on street tires and then you go to a 200 treadwear tire, the change in the car is so great, right, that you're going to kind of have to relearn things pretty quickly. So, when I tell people like, hey, just get some tires right away, it's to help you learn the car with that tire right out of the gate, right? Because that's what's going to really help you optimize your performance in that vehicle, because you're really just optimizing that tire and you're trying to find the fastest way around the course with what that tire can do. Because these 200 treadwear tires are getting so good, they're almost as good as, the old Hoosiers were, which were back in the day when we just had to have a DOT tire. There was no treadwear rating, and that was a fiberglass tire, and it was super, super sticky. We got like 3 laps out of them and they were dead. And you could do things that you didn't think were physically possible in a corner because those tires were so sticky. So if you're a normal, reasonable person driving yourself to Starbucks and taking your kids to school, you don't drive like a total psychopath. Right. When you get to an autocross course and you slap on those sticky tires, now it's time to crank up the volume and really drive like a ludicrous, crazy person. And then you have to do that to find out, like, oh my gosh, the car made it. Like, this car made it through the corner. And I know I've driven a lot of cars over the years. So like, I know what a stock Honda Civic can do in a corner. And now I know what my Porsche can do in a corner. And I always go like, oh, I need to go much faster. Right? It's a different car altogether. And it's got a lot more rubber and a lot more power and a lot more suspension, so I can go quicker. But I'm realizing like, oh, I got to push myself to do that. So it really just comes to find the limit, right? You need to find your own limit, concentrate on that, push for it, and go forth and start collecting trophies, man.
Trophies, man. That doesn't even seem like it's a reality thought at the moment, but
it's there for you. It's available.
Sounds good. Rob, I can't thank you enough. This has been fun, and you've also been helpful to me, not during the podcast, which I appreciate a lot. And I will say that for anyone out there who's new, find yourselves a Rob Krider. There's people at your local events who just love the sport and enjoy seeing people get involved, and they want to come back. And there is someone like Rob out there at every event that you're going to go to. But I would tell you, though, to hitch yourself to maybe 1 or 2 people, because if you start taking advice from everybody, you're going to get, like Rob said, you talk to 1,000 people, you're going to get 1,000 different opinions in this sport. And many of them are right, but you can get yourself going so far twisted up in circles by listening to too many people that you won't make any progress. So find someone who you get along with, someone who's got some skills because you see them on the racetrack, and kind of see if they'll mentor you and go back to the same well often, because you don't want to get yourself conflicting opinions, right?
Absolutely. And I've gone down that rabbit hole so many times, especially when I was early on, I was getting involved with like dual adjustable struts. And one of the problems with adjustable stuff is you can just adjust the car into being a total piece of trash.
Right.
And so that's what I did immediately. I'm like, let's turn all these knobs. I spent all this money. Let's make this thing super fast. And the car was terrible and terrible. I'm like, oh my gosh, I invested all this money and time and the car sucks now.
Yeah.
And so I started taking 1,000 opinions from 1,000 different people, and they were telling me stuff that was 180 degrees off from what I thought. And then ultimately, one of the things I did that really, really helped, and I should have mentioned this before, pair up with somebody and share a car. So my car buddy was a guy named Dave Schatz, and he's won a ton of national championships, both in road racing and autocross. And he and I shared a Mustang for a season, and he immediately knew way more than I did and made my car better and made me better right away.
Right.
So instead of fighting the car, we were then fighting the big nut behind the wheel, which was me. How do I catch up with Dave? And so never did, by the way. He's super fast.
Right.
But ultimately, like, having somebody help you with your car and share that car, you're sharing the cost, you're sharing the development, and you're sharing the coaching. And so pair up with somebody. It's a lot of fun, and you'll definitely go faster for it.
I've had someone tell me that I should just don't put any money into this Honda Fit. Find somebody to pair up with at Solo Nationals and be their tire warmer. And my worry about that is that I'm not good enough to get the tires warm enough for them to really make it worth their while. So that's something, and I'm also a little bit stubborn. I want to go back with this car and do it better than I did last time. And
this is your redemption tour this year. I'm looking forward to us racing together in H Street, and I know you're not going to finish DFL this time, and it's your redemption tour, and we've got to talk and make some changes to that car. Cool. And I know you are not going to finish last this year. I have all the confidence in the world.
All right. Well, that's good to hear. Let's see if I can match your confidence with my confidence.
Remember, I told you these things are powered by confidence.
That's right. That's right. All right. This is the time where you get to thank all the people that help you do what you do. I see a bunch of logos behind you there.
Yeah, no, I'm very lucky. I run Double Nickel 9 Motorsports, and all these people behind me have helped me out over the years. I want to thank you for having me on the show. I want to thank SCCA.com for letting me run my column there every month and having a great time with that. So I write for a bunch of different magazines. You can find me all over the place at robkrider.com. I have my own podcast called Stories and Cocktails, which talks about car stuff occasionally. Mostly it's about traveling around the country and having a good old time. So, yeah, check those things out, and I'll see you at the track. And if you ever see me at the races, let's hang out, and I'll race big wheels with you at the Nationals.
There you go. There you go. We're going to put a lot of links in on all of your writing and your podcasts and stuff. So all of that stuff will be in the show notes. And Rob's a good guy to follow, so it'll be fun to do that. So, all right, my friend.
Brian.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, keep the shiny side up, and I'll see you in September.
All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network so you won't miss any episodes. It'd also be great if you leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. You can follow us on social media to find out who the next guest is. That is RacingWire Info on the tweet box. There's a new episode every single week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend. Stay safe and go play with cars.
I'm Abby Shear, and when I'm on my way to an autocross, I listen to the Inside the SCCA podcast.
Inside the SCCA is a presentation of the RacingWire Podcast Network and Rule 15 Productions. This podcast is not affiliated with, endorsed, or sponsored by the Sports Car Club of America. The views expressed within are those of the host and our guests, and not that of the SCCA.